Hi, I'm Nancy Radford, and I'm a mediator, conflict coach, and trainer. And what I train people in is how not to have conflict. So, in effect, I'm trying to make myself redundant by training people not to get into conflict or to reduce the damage of conflict. So why am I trying to make myself redundant as a mediator? Because I love being a mediator and I help a lot of people. It's because I've heard so many times at the end of a successful mediation, people saying, I wish we'd known what we know now months, if not years ago. I wish we'd had this conversation so much earlier. It would have saved us time and money and hurt, because it's very hard to repair relationships when they've gone wrong. So when Medin2 asked me to do a series called Stop Arguing and Start Talking, I was delighted because I love helping people to learn how to speak with each other and reduce the conflict. So let's get started. This is the fourth in a series of 5. So as I said, this series is called Stop Arguing and Start Talking, and I'm going to give you some tips that you can use every day. They're not complicated, but they are based on scientific research as well as my own experience as a mediator and a conflict coach and a human being. So today we're looking at conflict in the workplace. And one of the things we really want to look at today is the fact that the health of any relationship, team, or organization can be measured by the lag time between identifying and discussing problems. So it's about making work easier. So in the previous sessions and in the whole series, what we're trying to get across is to help you understand human emotions and reactions, to show you ways of improving your relationships through better communication. There are 5 sessions. This is, as I said, the 4th. The first was why we argue instead of talk. And then we learned some basic tools in the second session to change what we can. In the third session, we looked about conflict in the home and how peace can start with us. This session's about making work easier. And the 5th session is how to put things right when they go wrong. Because unfortunately, no matter how good we are at helping to resolve and avoid conflict, conflict is a part of life. So things will go wrong, and this is to help you prepare for that. In the previous sessions, we learned why humans are resistant or negative. We learned how stories affect emotions, our own emotions as well as others. And we learned some tools. We're getting quite a little toolbox now. We had pause to take control, and that's one I will go over every session because it's so important. We talked about changing the stories we tell ourselves and others. We talked about reassuring our fears and catching our anger, both our own emotions and those of others. We talked about when to speak up or stay silent, and we learned a tool called Skim for this. We learned about how sing helps us express our emotions safely. We learned about how luck can create constructive conversations, the magic of listening, and learning how to speak so that others listen. What I'm going to cover today is why delay is deadly and why we do tend to delay at work. We'll also look at when you've identified conflict, how you can have conflict first aid at work. You need to protect what's important. You need to prevent harm and restore relationships. And what do you do when others argue, either your colleagues, your employees, your boss, should you intervene? And we look at, if you are thinking of intervening, how to avoid tripping up. And we'll teach you a tool for successful intervention in others' disputes. So first, I really want to talk to you about decision making when things show up instead of waiting till they blow up. And it's a habit we can learn. It's a thing that we tend not to do, particularly at work. We tend to think, oh, it's not very nice, but I don't want to kind of pull someone up on it. And we don't think that sometimes not telling people their failings is actually very cruel because they keep on doing that. We talk about people instead of to people. We put things off until things just either blow up. Sometimes they don't blow up, but because we're holding all this anger inside, we start being snide or sarcastic or doing other things that damage relationships, or we just avoid working with that person, and that can have a big impact on work. Or we leave. And if a boss doesn't spot this, they can lose their good people and end up with the person who's causing problems. So let's just look at how conflict grows and why it's really important to catch it early. So when conflict starts, it starts with difference. And differences don't need to lead to conflict. You can manage differences. It may be, I need a quiet space and you like music. We can talk about that. If we handle it before emotions start getting involved or we start a disagreement, it's much easier to resolve. Getting to a disagreement takes a little bit of time, and it's still fairly easy, but as the conflict grows, it gets faster and faster. It's kind of zooms up, and all of a sudden, it blows up. And this is particularly true because of the way our emotions work. So if I start getting defensive, it can come across as aggressive. And then you start getting defensive, and I feel aggressive, and the whole sort of escalation between two people just ding, 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 boom. So we need to learn how to handle things early, because if we leave them, we will lose staff, or we will make ourselves ill, or work will suffer. So even the decision to wait is a decision. So how do we manage conflict in the workplace? A lot of you will have done a first aid course. And first aid, there's three principles. One is to protect life. The other, so you protect airways, you protect people's circulatory system. The second principle is to prevent things getting worse. And the third is to try and restore healing. And conflict first aid is just the same. You want to protect what's important. You want to prevent harm, and we need to restore relationships. Let's look at each of those in turn. So how do we protect what's important? First of all, we need to stop, and we need to calm ourselves, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, wherever you are. If you aren't calm, if you don't have your emotions under control, everything will go downhill. So when something goes wrong at work, or you start to feel your emotions rise, catch yourself, take a breath. This is the pause tool. Remember, take a breath, breathe in to 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 8. Yeah? Do that a couple of times. Now this will just make you look as though you're sensible. It only takes half a minute, and it gives you a chance to turn your brain back on. Once your brain's turned back on, assess the situation. Yeah? Plan what you're going to do. Do a bit of a risk assessment, thinking, okay, If I do this, what's going to happen? If I don't do that, what's going to happen? And then choose whether you're going to do something or wait and see how it develops. Sometimes waiting is the best answer, but only after you've done that assessment. And of course, if it's something like somebody chasing you with an axe, then don't calm yourself, run. But normally at work, when emotions start to rise, it's about people's status or people's relationships, or they might be very hungry or tired. So, this stopping and calming and assessing and choosing rationally will help conflict stay small and limit the damage. So, how do we prevent things getting worse? Right? Again, we need to manage our emotions. We need to keep our brain switched on, but we also need to make the other person feel safe. And people don't feel safe if you're angry, if you're getting all agitated. So, staying calm and helping them feel safe, you may need to ask them what it is they need. You may need to reassure them. And then listen before you jump in with solutions or answers or what you think would be best. Just listen. Don't judge. Ask for their point of view. Talk tentatively and aim for mutual benefit. Think about what's important for both of you. Try and find that common ground and think about, well, if we do this, we're both going to benefit. If you try and maintain that through any conflict or disagreement, you'll find you have much better results and much less damage to relationships. So, how do we get relationships restored? First of all, we need to realize that everyone feels hurt. Even if someone looks angry, that often comes from a feeling of hurt. And if we're feeling hurt and angry, it's very hard for us to help other people. And in all the airplane safety instructions, what do they tell you? They tell you put on your own oxygen mask first. Because if you're not operating well, if your brain is starved of oxygen, you will be a liability to others. So put your oxygen mask on first to make sure that you can help others. And putting your oxygen mask on is making sure you are safe, you are calm, and that you know how to help others, that you're being rational. If you can't do that at the time, try and find a better time. Maybe ask for some help, but address your own hurt and your own actions first, and then acknowledge the other's pain. Just acknowledging people's pain, and even if you think, oh, I can't understand why they're so upset about that, that isn't helpful. You may not understand, but to them, they are feeling that pain. So acknowledge that. And then apologize. We'll go into a lot more detail about apologies in section 5. But apologizing doesn't mean you're saying, I'm wrong, you're right. Apologizing means, I'm sorry our relationship has been hurt. I care about that. It means you care more about relationships than being right. And then do what you say you will, because you can't you can't talk your way out of something you've acted your way into. People will believe what they see, they'll believe your actions, and they always say actions speak louder than words. Now, what if you're in employment and you see two people arguing? The first thing is it really conflict? And how do we know when it's conflict and whether maybe they're just having a jokey conversation and they like arguing about their football teams? And you need to know whether it's conflict or not, because if you intervene when it's not conflict, people feel resentful, you feel silly, you look like you're micromanaging, you look like you're interfering. So, how do we know what conflict is? Conflict happens when opinions differ, when emotions start to hijack the situation, when there's a risk that it's going to damage a relationship or what they're doing. So, say an argument is possibly dangerous because they're not watching what they're doing with machinery or they're not doing what they should be doing. And then think about the motive for intervention. Yep. Why is it that you're intervening? Is it because something's dangerous? Is it because you care about the people, you don't want them to be hurt? Is it because you feel, oh, they're arguing, I'm here, I need to ride to the rescue? And then think about, is it actually your responsibility? Now, if you're the employer, it may well be. If it's a health and safety issue, and everybody should deal with that. But sometimes it's not actually your responsibility. So be clear about that, and then think about the consequences. What are the best possible case if you intervene? What's the worst possible case? Remember that risk assessment we were talking about. Think those things through, because if you rush in without thinking about the consequences, you run the risk of either making it more of a damaging situation or both of them stopping being mad at each other and being mad with you. So think about whether it's conflict or not, why you need to intervene, whether it's you're the right person or whether you should perhaps ask someone else. Sometimes it helps to ask an independent person like myself to come in so that they're completely impartial, and also be aware of the consequences of intervention and the consequences of not intervening. And the skim tool we learned in one of the earlier sessions would be an extremely helpful thing for that. Remember when you do intervene that people don't get defensive about what you're saying. They get defensive because of why they think you're saying it. So, for example, if they think you're intervening because you think they're incapable of solving their own arguments, they're going to get very defensive and they're not going to welcome your help. So think about your motives and how you do it. So to avoid trip ups, what you need to think about if you do decide to intervene, you need to think about the timing. Is now the right place? If they're having a full scale argument in the middle of an open office, you probably need to intervene, but think about how you do it and where you do it. It might be something that it's more diplomatic to talk to them individually, out of sight of everybody else. So think about your timing. As we said, think about the risk of intervention, not intervention, the risk of how you speak to people. Think about what you hope to achieve by intervening, not just, oh, it's an argument, I need to go in and fix it, but think about how you get across that intent. How do you tell people what you want, why you're intervening so they don't feel blame or shame? And then think about the personalities. Who's involved here and how will they react so that you do it in the right way? Do you actually understand what the issue is? And what is the whole problem? Do you not just understanding the situation or the personalities, but is the problem what you really think it is? Let me give you an example. So the Jim, who's the general manager, is in the toilet and he overhears Fred, one of the new recruits, complaining to someone else, "Oh, I'm not going out with my team anymore. They haven't asked me, so they didn't ask me on Friday if I was coming out with them. So I'm just going to do my basic stuff and, stuff them." So it's not really a good place to talk to someone in a toilet. And the risk is, well, something should be done because this is a new recruit. You don't want them to get mad. And the general manager's intent is, I want to fix it, but I don't want to look like I'm micromanaging. I don't want to undermine the line manager's job. So thinking about the personalities, he thinks, well, I don't know this new recruit, but I do know the line manager. And I'm going to have a word with him and, just sort of alert him to it without seeming like I'm being too interfering. And I don't really understand the full situation. And I'm not sure whether the problem is that that guy doesn't fit in, or is the problem that he's taken something wrong. So the general manager calls in the supervisor and he says, this is something I've overheard. It might be a something or it might be a nothing, but I thought it was worth alerting you to it. And I'm happy for you to, just a heads up there. And what you do is up to you. And it turns out that actually it's not a conflict, because what had happened was the line manager, the first time they'd asked the guy if he wanted to come and he said no. And the second time they'd asked him, did you want to come? And then they didn't want to harass him. So they hadn't asked him. And then all it took was a simple talk with the line manager to the new recruit to say, we don't ask everybody every time. If you want to come, that's really great. But, we don't want you to feel pressured. And that's why we haven't asked you. So working through that trip up tool can be quite helpful. Finally, how do you manage if you do decide to intervene? First of all, you need to treat people equally. Now, it may mean that you have to change your response, but it needs to look as though you are not showing favoritism. And sometimes that's very hard to do if you actually work with people and you've known them a long time. And that's where calling in a third party can help. And so first ask if you can get involved. Even if you know it's your responsibility to get involved, give them a little choice as to where and when. Explain what the situation is. Do it as objectively as possible and try and find a reason that makes them understand why you've intervened. It's not because you think they're incapable or they're useless or anything else. It's because they maybe don't realize the impact their behavior is having on the company or other people. So clarify what the situation is, what the impact is on the business, on them, and the consequences that if they don't change this behavior, this is what would happen. Ask them for their view. It may be that you need to do it individually if they're really mad and they can't have a sensible conversation or they're really emotional. But be sure that you treat them both with the same respect, regardless of their positions, and that you listen to them both equally and you don't make a judgment. Because if you start taking sides, things will get worse. You may end up in all sorts of trouble with the employment tribunal. So think very carefully whether you can do that and what words you use and how clear it is, because it may actually be quite helpful to call someone else in. And this is because people will often be more honest with a stranger. and they dump out all their anger, and the stranger doesn't judge, but they don't then ever have to see that person again. So they can put that to one side. All the dirty washings over there, we can just start afresh. If they've poured their heart out to you, they'll always be feeling, I told them something I maybe don't want them to remember. So show respect, clarify, ask, listen, and empathize, and be sure you treat people equally. So today we've looked at why delay is so deadly in conflict. We've looked at the 3 principles of conflict first aid about protecting what's important, preventing harm, restoring relationships, and how to manage when others argue, thinking about should you intervene or not, using the trip up tool to assess how you intervene, and then using the scale tool to manage that intervention if you do decide to intervene. So what next? If you found this talk useful, be sure to watch the rest of the series to learn more. If you want one-to-one sessions, you can book these with me on the Medin2 app. If you would like more group stuff or a mediation, contact Medin2 as well. And the final session in our series is called How to Make It Better If It Goes Wrong. So when things are working for us, instead of fighting and struggling, we need to say what's happening here. And when we understand what's happening here, we're more able to fix it. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening. And the next session is on how to make it better if it goes wrong. And if you've missed any of the sessions, you'll be able to see them on the Medin2 app.